We are now concluding our homily series, Don't Believe Everything You Think. And we've approached it from a number of different angles, like rethinking your choices, the meeting of the minds, and change your mind. Something to think about. But today we're going to conclude it with this. You are what you think. You are what you think. If you think big, you will become deep, rich, and fruitful in this life and the life to come. If you think small, you're going to dry up and wither and be shallow. You are what you think. Now, in our parable today, there are a number of surprises, shocking things. And the first is this. The king makes a wedding feast for his son, and he invites people to come to it. And they do not come. Here's the most extraordinary thing, the chance of a lifetime. Who has access to a king or a king's son or to a king's feast? A choice of a lifetime. And they say, well, I'm not coming. Isn't that shocking? That is shocking. It's kind of like this. Suppose an ambassador from the British embassy comes to your door and gives you an invitation to a royal wedding to be held at Windsor Castle. What would you naturally think we would do? Well, first of all, we would respond to that invitation, right? And then we would prepare for the wedding. We would get tickets to fly to England. We would make sure that we would order the right clothes to wear. A tux or a gown appropriate for the occasion. And once we get there, we probably get a chauffeur to drive us up in a Bentley or a Silver Ghost, Rolls Royce, whatever people drive there, and they'd take you up and you would be received. They would ask you for the invitation. You'd get an invitation. And they would say something like this, the Mr. Wargle family, please come. And we would be ushered into St. George's Chapel or the royal dining room where everything is just perfectly set. And you'd be received there, a choice of a lifetime. Whoa. Would you refuse something like that? Well, this is what's happening in the gospel. All sorts of excuses come up. Like, I have to do this, I have to do that, and they're all mundane activities. How do you explain that? It's small thinking. We are what we think. Now, a second shocker is this. We find that at the feast, there's this man there who's not properly attired. And the king sees him and has him bound hand and foot and thrown out. I'd say that's pretty shocking, don't you think? It even seems kind of rude, don't you think? But this guy has a history which God invites us to think through. And that is this. Number one, he had an invitation. He had an invitation to God's feast. Because it says, go out in the highways and the byways, take everyone, good and evil, invite them in. He had an invitation. But you know something? He did not respond to it. Why didn't he respond? Well, it could have been out of fear. You know, I don't know if these are my people or not. Maybe lack of faith. Maybe it's a scam. I'm not even going to look into it. Maybe he's just lazy, but he doesn't respond. And so he didn't prepare. He didn't have the right clothes. And somehow, in some mysterious way, we don't know, he ends up in the feast. How did he get in? He didn't come in through the front gate. He must have snuck in the basement somehow, and all of a sudden he finds himself in Windsor Castle, right? And he's wearing cut-off jeans. Maybe he's wearing a t-shirt with the Grateful Dead on it. And he's saying, hey, I'm here. Boy, I'm sure he fell out of place, right? He was out of place because he was not prepared. In other words, he didn't belong there because he was thinking small all of his life and was not thinking big. God invites us to a feast. He's inviting us to think big. Isaiah, in chapter 25, he sets the vision before us. And that day on this mountain, I'm going to make a feast of fat things. Fat in the marrow, choice wines. You might say, whoa, this is high cholesterol. But back in those days, people were poor. And they hardly ever had any meat unless it's on the big occasions. And so anybody reading this would say, wow. Their eyes would roll with delight thinking about this feast. God invites us to a feast. But the next verse says, and he will take away the veil that covers the face of the nation. And I think, you know something? That sort of takes us today, don't you? Wouldn't you like someone to take your mask? How many people like to wear their mask, you know? What's behind your mask? What's behind your veil? We all have a veil. Because inside of us, we're afraid to be seen for what we are. And the veil often is a veil of pride, something that you set before people, but it's not really you. And God's going to take this veil apart. It's a veil of small thinking. And he's doing this now. This is what Jesus is doing. He's inviting us today, my dear brothers and sisters. We could be here at Mass, and we might say, wow, you know, I'm here. And I'm glad you're here. Or if you're watching, I'm glad you're watching. But we can still be thinking small. God has challenged us to think big. And when we're thinking big, we prepare. We respond to God's invitation right now in our heart, saying, Lord, I want to think big. I want to think big. You're inviting me to think big. I want to come to your feast. And those who respond to the invitation, like Paul in Philippians, he says, I don't care if I live or I die. I don't care if I'm poor or if I'm rich. It doesn't matter because the whole life is a feast for me. And I know that if I pass from this life, I go to the banquet of God. Don't believe everything you think. However, you are what you think.